This video is brought to you by the 3-Minute Board Game patrons. Keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon. Kia ora koutou, and welcome to this much longer than 3 minutes, 3-Minute Board Games video. Today I'm inspired by a geek list I saw on Board Game Geek, where a user called Moonrock went through his entire life history and looked at the favourite games at different stages of his life. I thought it was a really cool idea. I reached out to Moonrock and said, hey, I'm inspired by your geek list. Can I make a video doing my own story? And they said that was a really cool idea. So here I am. I'm going to run through my favourite games evolving from when I was a kid all the way through to now and have a look at all the collateral and stuff I've got left behind of those games. Now, some of those games are lost to the past and I don't have any connection to them whatsoever anymore. But some I still have quite a bit of stuff of, many years after I last played my last game of them. The cool thing about this list, and the reason I was inspired to do it, is everyone has a different journey here. Everyone starts off playing different games and ends up with different favourite games. And we go through different cycles in our life. And I think it's a cool thing to look back at who we were and how that's informed who we are now. It's the kind of thing you can do to all facets of your life, but here, we're just going to do it about board gaming. Generation X-Wing, that's gotta be the Death Star. So like a lot of people, I started off playing a whole bunch of toy store games, and when I was a kid, I played a bunch of them. I really can't recall what my favorites were, but I definitely know I played Snakes and Ladders to start off with, and then moved on to things like Careers and the Game of Life, and something called the Game of Knowledge, which was a kid's trivia game. I played those a bunch. Careers especially, I remember playing that. It's just a roll and move game, but it was fun when I was like 6 or 7. Really enjoyed it. I don't have any of those old games anymore. My family used to have a box of about 20 board games, and those were all thrown out when I turned about 13, because my father's a very strange conservative man in that regard. He was like, oh, you've turned 13, you don't need board games anymore, off they go to the tip. So there's a whole bunch of messy early childhood stuff here that I can't really remember what my favourite was at any particular time. The first game I can really remember being my favourite is Connect 4. Generic 80s new wave, beep, bop, beep, bop, beep, bop. This is a song from the 80s, the decade which it currently is. So the very first game I recall being really into was Connect 4. And friends and I used to play this at lunchtime quite a bit. Quite a few people had a copy of it. But one of the really interesting things at this time is I'm old enough that computers are a brand new thing in schools at this point. And Connect 4 was one of the first things that popped up on computers. You could play a computerized game of Connect 4, and that was kind of a big deal. It was such a big deal, in fact, that my school organized a Connect 4 tournament. And people would play Connect 4 in classrooms and enter into a big like round robin thing. And they hosted the finals in front of the school assembly. So the top 2 Connect 4 players in our primary school, which is elementary school for Americans, I got to play a game of Connect 4 in front of an audience. It's like a proto live stream of something. And I found that really hilarious because I was one of the final 2 players. I lost the final. I didn't win the final. I'm not going to brag and say I was the Hillcrest Normal School Connect 4 champion, but I did come second in the tournament, and that was quite funny. It's something I remember, playing Connect 4 in front of an audience. Very odd when you think about it, but one of those little wacky childhood experiences. And Connect 4 is the kind of game that practically any gamer, you can set this up, put it in front of them, and just start playing a game, and everyone will instinctively know how to play. I saw a really cool set of videos of this guy who walks around with a portable Connect 4 board and just walks up to people and see if they'll have a game, and people just play it. It's delightfully simple and still delightfully a good game. And it's one I expect to be playing a fair few games of it with Anne when she's a little bit older. I think she'll really like the puzzle here. I think it's fascinating. Such a simple, abstract game, but such a really good one. And this was, I absolutely loved Connect 4 for like a good number of years. It was my favorite game, a game I played a ton. And it's remarkable how well it holds up, and just how much I'm smiling just playing a game by myself, just throwing down coins. I actually don't know if I was playing that completely in sequence, because it was kind of half focusing on talking and half focusing on putting the pieces down. But yeah, Connect 4. I feel a whole bunch of nostalgia looking at this, and a lot of really good strong memories. And kind of, I can see why this has sold a gazillion copies. It's just so easy to play and so fun. Before we move on to the next board game, I'm going to give a shout out to the Fighting Fantasy series of books. This was the very first one I got. It's got a message in there from my sister from my birthday in 1987 when I was 10, and these were a huge part of my gaming history, and still are. I still pick them up when they come out. These books in no small part got me into solo gaming, got me into board gaming in general, and got me into fantasy role-playing and a whole bunch of other stuff. So Fighting Fantasy was a really big part of my story, along with games like Dungeons & Dragons and a whole bunch of other role-playing games. But a big part of my board game journey. Principally solo gaming, I think, because without these, I don't think I would be that much into solo gaming. Oh yeah, and that is a full collection of all the Fighting Fantasies. That took me quite a while to assemble, years in fact. A lot of raids of secondhand bookstores across New Zealand. Probably the first gamers game that I got into was a game called Talisman. Now, Talisman was the game of fantasy adventure. You roll some dice, you move your people around the board, you draw cards, and stuff happens. It was a bit of a random event generator. The goal was to get to the middle of the table and defeat the dragon in there. I think that was... Either way, I haven't played Talisman in a very long time. I do, however, have a copy of Relic. Now, Relic is essentially the same game with a few tweaks, but with the Warhammer 40,000 theme. And you've got your characters, you move around the board, you draw counter cards, you get war gear, you level up, and ultimately you're trying to get to the middle of the board and fight the baddie in the middle. Talisman was real simple stuff, but when you're 10, when you're like 10 or 11 years old, it is amazing. You're rolling dice, you've got a character, you're leveling up, you're drawing all these cards, you're getting cool stuff, you're killing monsters, you're getting money and power-ups, and if you know someone who has all of the add-ons, the board got massive. They were like add-on boards for a dungeon and for a city. I only had like 2 of the expansions, but I had a friend who had all of them, and we still loved going around to their place and just playing all afternoon. I still keep a copy of Relic as a cozy game. This is a game I'll pop out when my friends are not in the mood to actually play something, and we just need something in the middle of the table as an activity, because people are talking about real life stuff, or everyone's just really tired from work and just doesn't want to do anything that requires that much thought. Because these aren't deep games. Relic and Talisman, they're not deep games. They are literally random event generators. You can have some games where you just have the worst rolls, the worst card flips, and everything goes terribly for you. And you can have other games where things go perfectly for you, and you end up with great power weapons and all this cool stuff, and you romp home and win the game. None of that has anything to do with skill, but it is a good bit of mindless fun, and I'm quite glad I still have a copy of Relic. I don't think I'd ever get Talisman back in itself. Relic fills a very specific niche now for a very specific group of people. Next up, we have my favourite game of my tweens, and that game is Gammarauders. It's an everyone versus everyone post-apocalyptic game, where each of you is playing a distinct faction that survived the apocalypse. The quirk of the game is each of you has a giant bioborg, a mutated animal that you've strapped weapons to. That might be Squawk the Penguinoid, or Blip the Teleport Turtle, or even Drax the Pack-Ratula. These big monster things. Oh yeah, here's Dweemish the Hamsterian. He's a giant hamster. He's a 20-foot tall hamster, strapped with weapons. And that was like the quirky fun thing of this game, is you had a whole bunch of units called Popcorn, and they're called Popcorn because the Bioborgs eat them like popcorn. But they were your support forces, and then this one big scary unit that you'd roam around the board, collecting these things called pods. And energy pods gave you boosts in combat and also allowed you to do other things. The pods, by the way, were randomly allocated in a 2d6 system, where you would put pods on the board based on 2d6 numbers rolled on hexes. And if this looks very familiar, it's because Catan would use the same system to much more success nearly a decade later. It's not a great game, it hasn't held up well. It has several big glaring problems. One is that the combat, if you get enough popcorn together, each of them adds like +1. So if you have like 20 popcorn, and someone's Bioborg is rolling 1d8 plus 5 or something, it doesn't really matter. The person with the most popcorn is probably going to win. Unless someone is holding these cards. And these cards are utter madness. Reverse combat result. So over time the game evolved into being a race on who could hold the reverse combat results and use them the best. And that kind of killed the game in the end for us. But this was quite a bit of silly fun. I'm glad I've kept it. It does have a really cool feature which other games would later copy, and that is introducing a one versus all mode to an existing all versus all game. So one person would play the Gammarauders in that mode, and everyone else would team up against them. That created quite a different gameplay experience. But I have not played Gammarauders probably in 25 years. I've kept the box the whole time because it has big sentimental value, but it's not one that anyone ever says, hey, let's play Gammarauders.
It's the 90s.
So while we were playing Gammarauders at school, it wasn't really the game I wanted to be playing. I wanted to be playing Battletech. The problem is, I was 11 and 12, and my peers were 11 and 12. And I tried teaching them how to play Battletech at 11 and 12, but it just didn't stick with most of them. It wasn't until I got to high school and there were some older people I could play with that I got to play a lot of Battletech, and it became my favorite game. I have not played an actual physical game of tabletop Battletech in an age. I literally cannot recall the last time I played it. I have played a whole bunch of Battletech related computer games, however, and I've spent hundreds of hours playing Battletech on Harebrained Schemes Battletech game. I much prefer it as a computer game that does all the work for you. I don't have my original Battletech box, but these are the original Battletech maps and the original standees from that game. I do have the original CityTech box, which is one of the first expansions for Battletech, and Battletech Reinforcements over here, which is a whole bunch of standees for it. That's all the old stuff. I've got some maps. So these are the original maps from the core box. And while I had a whole bunch of fun playing Battletech most of the way through high school, what really stands out for me now is not the game mechanics at all. It was the world building. When I got into the game, it had some of the most amazing world building I've ever seen for a game. It had these great house books that told you all the history of the great houses, and they're written in such rich and vivid detail. I've still got one of those books here, Battletech Technical Readout 3025. This is just a splat book. This is just a book that has a whole bunch of different mechs in it, and their loadouts, their capabilities. But every single one of them comes with this big amount of text over here, this big world building, all this history stuff. And I just read and reread this technical readout back to front. I love this kind of building a world around your game, and it's something that's really influenced me, and why Red Dust Rebellion, I think why I was so focused on making sure that that world was believable, because the world of Battletech with its giant stompy robots has some giant holes in it, but overall feel with the houses and everything was really great. The reason I stopped playing this one was the clans. The clans to me felt like they were from a completely different series, from a completely different setting. You had this very grounded, realistic inner sphere, and all of a sudden they added Klingons to it. And it broke the game for me. They also mechanically broke the game for me as well, because the clans were on a whole different power curve, and I just didn't care for that story and moved away from the game after that point.
Generic 90s grunge song, everyone in Flanders. Generic 90s grunge song, something from Seattle.
Up next, we head into my late teenage years, where I joined a cult. A very sinister worldwide cult known as being a Games Workshop fan. During that time, I had a ton of different favourite games, and they were all Games Workshop ones. There's Blood Bowl, which I've played so many times, and here's some surviving members of my original Blood Bowl human team. There's Space Hulk, which I've got set up in front of me, which I had the original of, and then that got thrown out or destroyed somehow, and I ended up buying the 3rd edition much later and painting that up. And I'm really proud of the paint jobs I did on this. I think 3rd edition of Space Hulk is a beautiful board game, and this is one I still actually like to play. I like that I spent the time to make it look really cool. And then there was also Warhammer 40,000, and this is all the Warhammer 40k stuff I've got left. It's one Sons of Medusa's army using models that you just can't use in the game anymore because they're all the wrong size, and they're all on the wrong bases. My Terminators are about the size of a current Terminator's leg. Everything's just not to scale. The tanks are bigger, the Marines are bigger, everything's just way, way bigger. None of these models are currently usable. I mostly just keep them because they were an art project and I enjoyed doing that. I also played a lot of another game called Space Marine Epic, but I have no models left of that. The Games Workshop stage was an interesting one, because back then they actually made some pretty good games. Space Hulk and Blood Bowl are really neat games, and I still like them, and I've still played different versions of them on the PC, and I've played Space Hulk itself in person quite a bit. To say I'm not a fan of the Warhammer 40,000 system is a bit of an understatement. I think the fact that it's rooted in a single D6 system is just going to hamper it for all time, as far as I'm concerned as a player. I also think Games Workshop are very half-baked when it comes to making any idea of what balance is in a game, and I don't think they really care. I think they just want to shift product. So they're quite happy for new lists to be completely overpowered. That means you buy the new stuff and you go and play it and you win and you feel big and strong even though you're winning because the list is overpowered. That's not a particular game loop I find rewarding. In fact, I find it quite exploitative. So I haven't played Warhammer 40,000 in any real fashion since 4th edition. Played a tiny bit of Horus Heresy because I was curious on that because I liked the books. And that seemed a little bit better because everyone in that game are Space Marines, so the field's quite level, so having this system where you can't show much granularity isn't that big a deal. And it just seems kind of fair having Legion versus Legion. You're not going to get really strange things happening. But yeah, overall, Games Workshop. Even today, they're a company I'm a little bit sus of. I think they're not as bad as they used to be. They definitely seem a lot more friendly with influencers and with their community in general. There was a period where they were quite a cult. And I got no real regrets not being a big G-Dub fan anymore. So, after leaving the Warhammer Games Workshop cult, what did I do next? That's right, I joined a different cult. I joined the cult of collectible card games. Now, unlike most people, I didn't get into Magic the Gathering. What I got into was a different game, and that was Vampire the Eternal Struggle, or as I knew it, Jihad. And I still have all of these binders. All of these binders full of cards for a game that I have not played at a donkey's age. This one's definitely like 15 years since I've played it. I have everything from the first, I think, 5 sets, because then the game went a bit dormant for a while. So they put out the original, then Dark Sovereigns, I can't remember what the other sets were called, Sabbat and Sabbat War, and yeah, so I got all that stuff. And by all of it, I do mean all of it. I fastidiously collected the stuff. So this is like, yeah, these are all just the vampire cards for those sets. Then there's all the binders full of the actual cards and boxes of duplicates. So this is like just one card of each, I think, in here. The funny thing about Vampire the Eternal Struggle, we were playing a lot of Vampire the Masquerade at the time. It was the thing to do, and doing a lot of the live role-playing game, and we played this, but I learned the rules wrong. We all learned the rules wrong. We played in our city a variant of the game that was completely different to what everyone else was doing around the world. We played with card restrictions. So normally, like in a game like Magic the Gathering, you're only allowed 4 of any card in a deck, and we played with those rules. We played with restrictions of 4 of any card in the deck, just because the people who taught it to me played Magic, and that's just how they made decks. You had a limit of 4 of any card. That's not a rule in Vampire the Eternal Struggle. That's not a rule in Jihad at all. You can have 20 of one card if you want. And we went out of town and we played against people from out of town, and they had these decks that were completely different to how we played the game. So we'd been spending years, and I mean like 2 or 3 years, playing this game routinely over and over again, like late nights. This was like a university late night gaming game, playing till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning some nights. And finding out that we were just doing it completely and utterly wrong, I've never felt interest in a game just disappear overnight like it did for this particular Vampire the card game, because we then had to revise. We'd traded and built our collections around that idea as well. So if you had more than 4 of a good card, you traded those away because you had no real need for them. So things like Freak Drive, which is a fantastic Fortitude card, allows you to take an action, spend 1 resource, and then untap and take another action. Exceedingly powerful card, cornerstone of a whole bunch of decks. We thought 4 of those was a sensible limit. We came across people who had 20 in one deck, and all they did was basically 1 action, Freak Drive, do something else, and that was their game plan. Just constantly play Freak Drives. So yeah, I had no idea how much, or if anyone's still interested in these cards. I feel like it'd be fun to pull together some decks and play with the game again, but then you'd have to teach people. You'd have to teach people how to play it, and that's not particularly easy, because it's quite an odd game. Unlike Magic, which really works as a duel, probably best. Vampire worked best at like 5 players, where you had a big group going, and it became almost like a diplomacy card game. It was a very unusual experience, and not one I really see as being a particularly good like tournament game at all. We played it like you would say Twilight Imperium. It would be like a big event game. We'd play for 2 hours, and people would fight amongst themselves, and then we'd pull out different decks and do it again. We'd just play multiple rounds of this sort of politicking, backstabbing, betraying card game. So really different, and something I've not really seen again. Really interesting card game, but one that really requires a group that are super into it. We had that for a good number of years until finally everyone just went, we've been doing it all wrong, and the game just kind of died. Well, if anyone's got like a really good offer for a full collection of all these things, let me know. As I say, I'm not entirely too sure what this would be valued at. I don't even know if it has any value. That's the problem with collectible card games. If this had been Magic, if I'd had all of these early sets of Magic in here in pretty good condition, I could probably afford to pay off my house. Maybe I should have got into Magic back in the day. After finishing university, I moved city. I decided that Hamilton, where I grew up, wasn't going to be a great town for me to live in long term. I found the place quite depressing and wanted a totally different scene. So I moved to Wellington, the capital city of New Zealand, and have never looked back. Getting down here though, I had to build up a new network of friends. And I started joining some board game groups and other things to get to know some people down here. And the first game I really got into was A Game of Thrones, the board game. This game had a lot of the elements that I was enjoying in Jihad. That being that it's a reasonably long multiplayer negotiation game with some card play and a lot of intrigue. I played this game a whole bunch. And it's how I met a ton of people I still game with today down in Wellington. I'm also one of the few people, I think, who came to A Game of Thrones not from a TV show, not from the books, but the board game is literally my first experience of the setting. So I'd sit down to play the game, and people would be talking about the different cards and how they represented different characters from the books, and I'd have no idea what they were talking about. And they'd talk about things like the Red Wedding, and I'd blank it out. It didn't mean anything to me. There weren't enough hooks or anything like that. I ended up reading A Game of Thrones, and I don't really read a lot of fiction. I don't particularly enjoy reading fiction, but I read the books just to understand this game, which is a big thing for me, because as I say, I don't really enjoy reading a lot of fiction. And I probably could have picked a better series to start reading, as 20 years later, the series is still not finished. And we've had a full TV show run in that time as well. The reason this game cooled on me in the end is everyone needs to be up to speed and up to skill with the game. It works well when everyone knows the game in and out, and you play it over and over again, and you develop sort of familiar patterns within the game. It's a game that demands a group that treats it with respect and plays it again and again, and learns it, and learns how the counterbalances and weights in the game work. I've had a couple of plays of it in the last 10 years where there's been learners at the table or new players to the game, and it's not balanced, it's not fair. You know that player doesn't have a chance, and they're going to make missteps that are going to throw the game's inherent balance out of place. So if you've got a new player and they're playing as Lannister, it doesn't really matter what the Greyjoy player does. Baratheon and Tyrell have just got a little bit of a boost. If your new player is playing as Stark, then that's great news to Baratheon and Greyjoy. And after a bunch of frustrating games like that, where I'm sitting at one end of the table, seeing something unfold at the other end of the table I know I can't do anything about, and it just wasn't fun. One of the weird things about this one is I played it 30 or 40 times before the TV show came out, and then maybe twice after. Because I'd long lost interest in the game at that point. Still, this is a very good game if you can get that group that will play it over and over again. It really sucks if you just play it once. Okay, so I've gone from Games Workshop being a cult to collectible card games as a cult, and now I've got 2 Fantasy Flight games in a row. Am I in another cult? I think I might be, But this one I don't feel quite so bad about, because from about 2003 to 2018 or so, Fantasy Flight Games put out a hell of a lot of good games. Like, a ton of great games. Arkham Horror 2nd Edition was one of them, and this is a game I have played an oodle, just so much. I have played absolutely so much, and I still love it. We played this 3 weeks ago. So 3 weeks ago, this was on the table. My friends and I, we would have our regular D&D game. Some players were missing. We were down to 4 people, so we played Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, and we had a great time. It is still hilariously good fun. We play it a very specific way, or I run it a very specific way, which is I tend to play with the core game and one module at a time. So we'll play with one sideboard, say Innsmouth, or play with the King in Yellow turning up, but not including all 8 or 9 of the expansions at once, because then the game becomes really messy, and it actually becomes very watered down as well, because you'll have Dunwich sitting there, but you might only have 1 or 2 gates open in Dunwich the whole game, and it just doesn't justify the entire board being out there if it's not doing anything. Whereas if you play with just the core and Dunwich and showcase that expansion, you get a richer, better experience for it. I love this game. I am never getting rid of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. Unless an Arkham Horror 4th Edition comes out that is just this, but better, and I don't have to pay for it. I can't imagine me wanting to get rid of this. And that is definitely not Arkham Horror 3rd Edition, let me tell you that. It will also hold a special place in my heart, very specifically, because I got very, very sick one year. I had an illness called viral pericarditis. It causes inflammation of the heart sac, and it was very much a life or death kind of thing there for a while, and it kept recurring. So every couple of months I was heading back into hospital, having spent 2 or 3 days in the cardio ward being monitored on, in case I had a heart attack or died. It was really bad, and I couldn't work. I also had incredibly strong flu-like symptoms and massive fatigue. So going up a flight of stairs would just completely do me in for the rest of the afternoon. I had to take things very, very slowly for a year, and I was living in a busted, run-down hovel of a place, a boarding house, and 1 room, shared facilities, and I was on a sickness benefit. So, I did not have a lot of spare money, but I did own Arkham Horror at the time. I had bought it before I got sick. I didn't have internet either at the time. I had a computer, but it wasn't connected to the internet. I played this pretty much every day for a year that I wasn't in hospital for doing something else. I had a table in that room that I would leave it set up on, and I would play this over and over again. I'd occasionally put a Game of Thrones on there as well and play like 6-player games against myself, but mostly I played a ton of Arkham Horror. Yeah, this game got me through a pretty rough period of time. It's one of the reasons why I'm a big advocate of solo gaming with recovery from things, because it's something to keep your brain going. It's something to help you not get quite so depressed about your state of affairs when you are very much alone. Like, I had some people visiting me and stuff, but I couldn't really go out. Like, if I was going somewhere, someone would have to drive, pick me up, and then, it'd have to be a low pressure kind of thing, and that was a whole year or so of that. But yeah, I kept loving this game for a long time after I recovered, and it was my favorite game for a good 5-6 years, and it's still a game that brings a smile to my face even today. And I'm really glad I still have it and have all the things for it. I have little acrylic gate markers and stuff like that, a little Cthulhu first player marker from HeroClix that I picked up, and I painted all the characters, because it normally comes with standees, but I got the miniatures, and I painted those up as well. I love this game. It is a great co-op. Don't go into it expecting it to be fair. It's a little bit like Relic and Talisman, and that is a random events generator, but you have so many levers on your character sheet with your sliders and how you spend clues that it's not total bullshit. Like, there's enough player controls to make it feel like you've earned a victory most of the time. Yeah, love this game. Really happy I have it, and I'm getting a little misty-eyed thinking about how important it is to me. And it's kind of fascinating me that a board game and an inanimate thing like this can just bring up those memories and make you remember all that stuff. But it definitely does with Arkham Horror. So for a few years there, I was a communications consultant working for different government departments. And I was doing quite alright in terms of money. That is why I got into Warmachine, because I needed to have less money. I bought a lot of Warmachine figures. As you can see here, they're almost all painted. This is, quite an impressive Warmachine set. It's a big Signar army. This is all one army. And I played this game up to tournament level. I played quite a few tournaments of Warmachine, something like 10 tournaments in the end. And I really, really liked this game. It was everything I wanted from Warhammer 40,000 that Warhammer 40,000 just wasn't. It was properly competitive. It had a huge skill element. Characters had cool, wacky, special powers, and there's always something really neat you could do. The way the game worked is you had a signature warcaster who was leading your force. So here's one warcaster here. This is Siege, and each of them has their own unique spell list and abilities and whatnot. But they have this once per game power. Every single warcaster in the game has one broken power they can use once per game. And when I describe how strong these powers are and how big their area effects are, you'll think the game is absolutely crazy. But Siege here, every enemy figure within 12 inches of him for that turn, the first time they take damage, their armor is halved. That is massive. That means standard guns just punch through heavily armored things and do horrific amounts of damage. There's another warcaster who knocks down everyone in their control radius down onto the ground. Every single one of these casters has some crazy, silly, game-altering thing. And everything's balanced around that. It's balanced around that everyone is broken. So if everything's broken, nothing's really that broken. It's a fascinating game to play. It's all about positioning. So in, say, Warhammer 40,000, a long-range gun will have a range of 48 inches. In Warmachine, it's more like 14 or 16 inches. That's a really long-range weapon. And I've seen some people say, oh, it's just a dice-based war game. It's all luck-based. Completely not true. In the time I was playing, this one guy, Chris, I think won all bar 2 or 3 tournaments. And he would normally go 7-0 in a tournament. He'd go all the way through, not get beaten. He might get beaten in one round, but that's it. Like 6-1 was about his worst record. I gave him one of his defeats at one tournament. I beat him on the first day. He still went 6-1 and won the tournament. It's one of those games that was just so highly skilled. But there were so many factions. And each faction had over a dozen warcasters. And each faction also had a variety of units about this big. They had so many options. So knowing what your opponents did became a matter of having to have encyclopedic knowledge. But that's something I'm quite good at. I'm quite good at learning a whole bunch of systems for a game and a whole bunch of rules. We were playing 2nd edition and I was really enjoying it. And then 3rd edition dropped and we had to relearn the rules and relearn all the abilities. And things had just changed slightly and it drove me mad. But it was really fascinating to see how quickly that killed off the hobby here. That and the company, Privateer Press, who was running it, they used to have this thing called press gangers, where they would have a local person who would organize events and get people involved. And those press gangers occasionally got little treats. They got like maybe a little model or a little bit of a discount or some exclusive information and stuff. It was just like a little Avon lady kind of thing, but for their board game. And the company got rid of that, and not long after, the game kind of collapsed, or at least it did here. And I can't help but think that they grew the game because they had these great customer support reps all over the place who were getting people to play. Then they kind of disrespected them and got rid of them. And those people went, well, I guess I'll go play something else. And they did. And they took everyone who played the game with them. That combined with the new 3rd edition, which just was just relearning and relitigating a whole bunch of stuff. Sit there, I'm going to go and get all of the splat books with all of the stats that you had to remember for this game. 2 seconds. Okay, so there are a bunch of stories in here as well, but there are a lot of units and a lot of stats and a lot of spells and a lot of abilities to remember for every single faction. And when you're having to relearn them, that's somehow worse than learning them from scratch, because you've got all the old information sitting in your head and you instinctively think that's correct, and then it's wrong, and it's so very frustrating. I had a lot of fun playing Warmachine. I think I played it at possibly the best time of the game as well for 2nd edition. We had some really big tournaments, and for a time there, it was a bigger game in Wellington than Warhammer 40,000 was. There were a lot more people playing in our tournaments than there were in the 40k ones. And they were really competitive too. So with the lessons learned from collectible card games like Vampire the Eternal Struggle and Magic the Gathering, there was no way I was going to get drawn into another collectible card game. Aha! I didn't get drawn into another collectible card game. I got drawn into a living card game. Netrunner in this case. And living card games, they're totally different. They don't end up with you buying giant piles of cards and spending way more money on the game than you actually intended to. They are better than collectible card games. You don't have to go chasing rares and chasing boosters. It's a much better system than the collectible card game thing. But I did get into Netrunner hard for about 2 years. 2 years, this was the game I loved to play, and it's about the only thing I talk about. And I still maintain here 8 tournament ready. Well, I don't know if you consider them tournament ready, but tournament ready for the time. Decks, 4 for the corporations, 4 for the runners. You've got a couple of like special cards and stuff that I won at tournaments. This is one of the few games I actually played at a tournament level. I really liked Netrunner. I played it quite a bit, and it was quite good. I played on a site called Octagon for quite a while. Like I'd be playing 2 or 3 games a night, just trialing out decks of random people on the internet and playing a hell of a lot of Netrunner for a while. But then 2 things kind of happened with this one. The first of that is I played at a tournament, and I got into the last match of the round. It was me versus the guy who won the tournament, and I counted up how much resources he had on his board, and I was going to trace him and then kill him. And then he lifted his elbow up because he'd been covering one of his cards. He goes, "Oh, I've got one more resource," and the judges didn't catch it. And I was like, "This prick cheated," and they're like, "We didn't see it. You miscalculated. So there's not much we can do." And I felt so utterly annoyed at this tournament and the whole tournament environment because a guy blatantly cheated in front of me and cheated me out of winning my very first Netrunner tournament, that the game just kind of fizzled off almost immediately for me. I was just furious. I didn't want to go to any more organized events. I was just a real grumpy sod over that. And it also got me thinking, one of the problems with games like this is you do kind of need a competitive scene. And once they start tickling off, and they always start trailing off. It's a wonderful thing about Magic the Gathering is that when it trails off, it picks back up again. A lot of other card games just don't do that. And Netrunner, it eventually trailed off there. Long after I left. Like, I left pretty early on, and then by the time I was interested in going back, the scene was dead. And then the game started to die as well. Games like this need support, and it's very cool that it's been brought back by Null Signal, and it is getting some support, but it's not like it was back in the day when you'd go along to a game store, there'd be 20 odd people playing, and you'd have price support. It's just not like that, or at least not in Wellington. This is still a fantastic game, and I do keep these decks around, because occasionally I'm like, "Hey, anyone just want to play a couple of hands of Netrunner with me?" I probably could like track down and play it online a bit more, but I just don't know if I have the time or inclination to keep up with the meta. It's another thing about these sort of games. You have to keep up with them. As new cards come out, you need to adapt and follow them along. They need to be. You need to be quite trendy in your thinking with them. You need to be there and be present with the game as it moves and evolves. And I find I can only do that with like 1 or maybe 2 systems at a time. And currently I have a completely different living card game occupying my brain space that would be used for potential Netrunner decks. And that game's Arkham Horror, the card game, which we will get to later. But Netrunner, the head-to-head in it, the bluffing, the different style of decks you can play, just how much of a feel and skill game it is. You can have like a very powerful deck, but if you are a complete muppet, you will lose every game of Netrunner because there's such a big skill element to it. Far more than, say, Magic the Gathering, where I personally think 80% of that is deck design and 20% of that is piloting. A pretty ordinary player with an amazing deck will still do pretty well because they're just drawing out the cards and it'd be a set sequence. Netrunner isn't like that. It's about feel. It's about knowing when to run, when not to run. It's about bluffing and putting out defenses on some things that you know they're going to run but are traps. there's so many layers and mind games to it that player skill and the ability to read your opponent counts for so much more than just having an awesome deck. Now, having a top draw deck really helps, but the pilot really makes a difference, and I think that's why this is one of my favorite dueling games of all time. So even more proof that I was on pretty good money there for a while is X-Wing. The next game I got into. The next game that also ended after an edition change. When they went to X-Wing 2nd Edition, and I looked at all my models and went, I don't want to buy conversion packs for all those. I think I'll stop playing. That said, I didn't play this one that much competitively. I just really enjoyed playing it with my friends. You see, I ran this really big Star Wars campaign. It was called Talisman Sector, and we designed the sector in Star Wars collaboratively, and the players were playing the leaders of different rebel factions, working together against the Empire, but with their own slightly conflicting and contrasting goals. And what we'd do is we'd have like a political stage where they decided what they were doing, and this mega game I designed which had a whole bunch of different systems, and then we would resolve things using X-Wing, occasionally Armada, occasionally Imperial Assault, and sometimes a role-playing game to zoom down to different missions that were happening all around the sector. So we played a bunch of very narrative-driven X-Wing. So that was where I would design the battles based on what they were committing to the fight and what the mission was. And I'd run it like it was part of a role-playing session. Everyone else was piloting their squadrons, and I was the game master running the whole show. It was amazing and fun, and we ran that for over a year. That campaign reached its natural conclusion, and we had a 2-table finale with an Imperial Assault mission going on to destroy some shield generators while there was a space battle going on. We had a ton of fun with that, and I do not regret buying these. I still occasionally run the Star Wars RPG, and these are just going to be a great resource for that. Just, yeah, they're cool as toys. I've still got all the materials to play the game, but I'll probably just play it narratively. I don't think of any interest whatsoever in playing this as a competitive game again. If you want to read up about that campaign and look at my notes, I wrote most of it up on my blog years ago called Von Krieg. I'll have a link in the description. I didn't get around to finishing off the finale and writing it all up just because a whole bunch of other stuff was happening at that time. The next game I fell in love with, and it became my favourite for a number of years, was Twilight Struggle from GMT. Now, my academic background, I have a master's degree in international relations and a postgraduate diploma in defence and strategic studies, as well as a postgraduate diploma in history teaching, and a bachelor's degree in politics and history. My master's thesis was on the Japanese Defence Force during the first 50 years of the Cold War. So the Cold War and all of the decisions and everything happening in it were a really big part of my education, and something I found really fascinating. And I got to play Twilight Struggle for the first time, and I was immediately hooked by it. I love how the game's played across these multiple different theatres, and they're all scored independently. I absolutely love the idea and theme of the superpowers and conflict. But the really big thing I loved here was its multi-use cards. Twilight Struggle has one of the most clever card systems out there. So it's pretty normal in a card-driven war game to have cards that can be used for events, and they can be used for their op points. And you use those op points to move troops around the boards and do attacks and different things. It's cool. Twilight Struggle does do that. But it has this extra thing where the cards in the deck represent either American, Soviet, or neutral interests. If you are the American player and you play one of your own cards, you can play it for the points or the event. If you play one of the Soviet cards, you play it for its points and the event goes off anyway, and you're both drawing from the same deck of cards. So you're going to have a handful of cards that benefit your opponent massively, and they're going to have the same. And there's something special about that. I just love how this game took something as complex as the Cold War and made it playable in an hour or two. Really clever game. And this got me onto my GMT thing. So after playing Twilight Struggle, I was like, oh, what other games have they got? I know, they've got that cool looking game, Paths of Glory, which is about the First World War. I want to give that a go. Oh, it uses a similar kind of system, but it's also a war game. So I got into playing a whole bunch of card-driven war games as well, of which Paths of Glory remains my favourite. Then I was like, what else have they got? Oh, they've got things like Command Sharia, these like solo games, historic solo war games. I'm going to have a look at that. And then I got into this thing called the Coin series. You have like A Distant Plane about the Afghanistan conflict, and Fire in the Lake about Vietnam. And I was like, wow, this Coin series, asymmetric warfare. How cool is that? How about I design my own damn game? And I was like, cool. And then I got to make my own game in the series. And this wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been absolutely obsessed with Twilight Struggle for a good amount of time. Because Twilight Struggle got me into the GMT Games sphere of influence, and from there I went in and dug into their other titles and fell in love with their other titles as well. But this Twilight Struggle was my #1 game for quite a number of years. And it wasn't until I eventually started getting annoyed with the DEFCON system in the game, it just started to bug me a little, that it sort of fell out of favor with me. Oh, and I played it like 200 times on the app and probably burned myself out on it. GMT Games, I mean, I'm biased because I've got a game with them, but they do something special. They do war games that are good, and there are a lot of rubbish war games out there on the market, and they just have a much higher standard of quality. I would call it. They're probably defined by the games they kick away as much as they are defined by the games they publish. But yeah, congrats to me, by the way, for being GMT's #1 selling game of the last year or so. Go Red Dust Rebellion. Try it out. Check out my videos. I'm doing a shameless plug for myself here. Even though this has never been one of my favourite games of myself because it's been work, I still think I've created something pretty cool there. And so has the rest of the team that helped me. We're up to the last 2 games, and these are my 2 favourite games I've been playing in the 2020s. And I go back and forth between these 2 games on which one is my favourite. The first of those, of course, is Spirit Island. Cooperative game of destroying settlers as they invade an island. Spirit Island's always been an important game to me for several reasons. The first of which is it's an absolute banger of a game. The second is its narrative and its story is about a Pacific island that is getting colonized, and it's being defended by spirits. And these spirits are very similar to a lot of the local legends and stories we have growing up here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. A lot of real-world games feel very distant to me. Games about Europe and stuff and the Americas, that's something that happens very much overseas. Spirit Island, despite its fantastical nature, feels a lot closer to home for me. And it's just so damn good. One thing I have to say is there are all these different spirits in the game. And they've done this amazing... Eric, the designer, has done a masterful job of creating all these characterful, interesting, unique spirits that have very different play styles. Combine that with a game that works with emergent powers as is, and you have so many different paths to play each time you play the game. It's a game that I have played well over 100 times, and I still consider myself a moderately okay player of. I've seen people online play this game who are so much better than me. Like, embarrassingly better than me. I look at what they're doing and go, wow. I wish I thought to do that. And that, again, is despite me being a professional player of board games and someone who has played this around about 100 times, because there's all of these spirits, and they're all really different to play. Plus, there's different invader types, there's different scenarios, there's all these different combinations around what is a rock-solid foundation of a game. And it's just cool. I did a video about this one quite recently where I went through all of these different spirits. I went through every single one of them and did a breakdown on where I rated them, like in terms of the power curve. Both in terms of raw power and my ability to get a good result out of them and how much fun they were to play. And that video's up on the channel. And it was really great to talk about a game that I love for that amount of time. It ended up being like nearly 100 minutes long because there's just so much content to get through. And that's just talking about the spirits. That wasn't talking about the scenarios or the adversaries. It's just these 34 different spirits. It's a game I could see myself playing forever, like until I can't play no more, because there's just so much to it. And every time I set it up and play it, I just go, damn, I wish I was playing that more. And there's very few games where I feel that way. And yeah, Spirit Island, it's high complexity. I'm not going to lie. It's not an easy game to get into, but there's a whole bunch of resources online and ways to ease yourself into it. And once you do, and if it clicks for you, it's such a rewarding game. And just the exploration phase of going through all of these spirits, that's 100 plays or so at least, because you're not going to fully understand one after your first play. You're going to have to give it multiple tries, and once you've done 3 tries for every single spirit, that's 100 plays right there. And that's probably you. At the end of that, you'd have a pretty basic understanding of how Spirit Island works. Fantastic game. Absolutely love it. More stuff that comes out for it. There hasn't really been a dud yet. There's a slight power creep. I think the latest expansion spirits are a little bit better than some of the earlier ones, but they're still all just brilliant. This is an amazing game, and I want to send out some well wishes to Greater Than Games, who have shuttered themselves down over the whole tariffs thing that's happened in the States. I'm really hoping we hear good news from them any day now that they're going to be coming back, because I think they have some really great games. Particular Spirit Island, they also have Sentinels of the Multiverse and a few other titles, and they're a publisher that really needs to be publishing games, because baby wants more Spirit Island. Get to it. It's somewhat accidental that I film most of my videos directly in front of my co-op game shelf, but here we are standing actually in front of the co-op game shelf. And as you can see, Spirit Island's right there, but taking the top of the shelf is the entirety of Arkham Horror the card game, my current #1 game along with Spirit Island. Now, when Arkham Horror the card game came out, it had all the hallmarks of something I was absolutely going to get into, but they sold it in this ridiculous format. You buy a starter box and then 6 blister packs over another 6 months to get a single campaign. Now, living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we were subject to the whims and fickleness of the shipping system. We'd sometimes get 1 pack before the previous one would turn up, so we get pack 4 in a cycle before pack 3 would turn up. I forgot to mention this in the Netrunner section, but that's another thing that killed my interest in Netrunner, was chasing down these packs. I also played a fair bit of Star Wars, the LCG, and the same thing happened there. We were somewhat victimized by remoteness, and if 1 pack went out of circulation, it would take months or sometimes a year for it to come back into circulation. It was a giant pain in the ass, and I just gave up on the game. About the same time I gave up on Netrunner. Then a few years back, they decided to change that model and go to this big box format. So instead of buying 1 medium-sized box and 6 boosters, you bought 1 big box for the story and 1 medium-sized box for all the player cards. I've chucked all those away, but I've kept the story boxes. 2 years ago as well, I had only played through the Dunwich Legacy. Since then, I've done Path to Carcosa, Circle Undone, Dream Eaters, Innsmouth, Edge of the Earth, Scarlet Keys, Feast of Hemlock Vale, nearly finished the Drowned City, and the only one left to do is the Forgotten Age. I've played so much freaking Arkham in the last 2 years, and it's been excellent. While I have multiple gaming groups with multiple different interests, I have one gaming group on a regular weeknight that is just Arkham Horror the card game, and that's how we're getting through the campaigns. It just does so much that I find engaging. First, it's a co-op, and I find it so much easier to get a co-op group together for an extended period of time than I do to get a group together for something like Game of Thrones that's competitive for an extended period of time. If people are playing competitive games, they mostly seem to be wanting to swap and change a fair bit more. It builds off Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, another one of my all-time favourite games, and a huge influence on me. And then it has all the deck construction and card manipulation stuff I love from a game like Netrunner. But instead of in Netrunner where I'm trying to beat someone else, I'm using my powers for good. If I build a janky deck that's completely busted, it's helping out my friends and not making them feel like they shouldn't have turned up to play that day. And I just love the stories, I love the vibes, I love everything about these campaigns. They're all slightly different in their own wacky way. And of 2 years of solid play, and that's just about every week, there's still more for me to play through, and that's only playing through each of these campaigns once with 1 character. Every single one of these boxes has a lot more replayability than just going through once. And I know that because I have played a bunch of them again on Tabletop Simulator as well. But that's all solo plays. For me, Arkham Horror the card game looks back at a whole bunch of my past and takes bits I like from a ton of different games and puts them into one singular experience. It's got the coziness of the Arkham Horror card game and the whole Lovecraft universe that I love so much. And it's got that power gaming, list building, deck construction thing that I miss from games like Warhammer 40,000, Warmachine, and Netrunner. My only trepidation with the game is they seem to be taking it in a whole new direction, and there's the possibility that some of the stuff up here is going to become less available in the future. And that sucks. Every single one of these campaigns is worth playing, and I've enjoyed playing each of them. I've enjoyed playing some of them a lot more than others. Say, Carcosa and the Innsmouth Conspiracy are my absolute favourites, but every single one of them has had its bright moments and has definitely not been a waste of my time to get through. And Bad Arkham is still better than most games. Now, once I get through The Forgotten Age, I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of deep dive videos on Arkham Horror as well, a little bit like my Spirit Island tier ranking video. Because preparing for this video has made me think about how I like to play games and how I like to consume game product. And that is, I really like to play set games over and over again. I am someone who likes to play games deep. Being a reviewer, I have to play a whole bunch of games shallow, like 1 or 2 a week. I have to play them 3 or so times, get familiar with the games, and do the review of them. That's not necessarily the type of gamer I feel comfortable being or want to be. I like games like Arkham Horror the card game, Spirit Island. Final Girl's another example of a game that I like that has just a ton of stuff to explore that I can play over and over and over again. And I think I want to do more content on that type of game. I want to do more content on the games that I'm comfortable with. Videos about strategy, about ranking different characters and factions, all that kind of stuff on the games I actually play over and over again, rather than the games that I play 3 times, have a bit of a review of, and then never think about again. Because there are a lot of games on the channel that once I've reviewed them and put them on the shelf, I never see them again. I never touch them again. And while I get that that's part of the gig, what I really want to do is play the games I love more. And that brings us to the end of the video. I'm just looking back at the list of games, starting off at Connect 4 and going all the way through to Arkham Horror the card game. And I think there's some themes there. I tend to be attracted to games that are very thematic. I tend to like games that allow me to do a bunch, that have a whole bunch of options and variabilities and things I can explore. Games that let me be creative within their system. I actually like that I can look back at most of the games I've played in my past and not snobbily look down on them. What I'm really looked down on is my own financial decisions and spending entirely way too much money on certain games that I probably shouldn't have. But that's just part of growing up. Maybe you can learn from my mistakes and not, throw all your money into one game and then not be playing it in 5 years' time. I don't know if there's a great life lesson to be learned from this video or not, but it was fun to take a look back at some of the old games. And, I want to hear about your board game journeys. Where did you start off in the hobby? What were the first games you remember playing? How has your tastes in games evolved over the years? What's your current favorites now? Let me know those in the comments. And as always, 3 Minute Board Games does not do paid content, aside from the occasional plug for my own games. Please support us on Patreon if you want to keep independent voices in board game media. And until next time, take care everyone.